My name is Jennifer. This year, I'll be turning 45. My only son started living on his own as he went off to college, making the house, which my husband, Michael, and I used to share with him, feel suddenly spacious. This home was custom built after many discussions with my husband. Designed to be a large house where our child could run around without any trouble, it has 5 bedrooms, a living area, a dining area, and a kitchen, 5 LDK, and it's 3 stories high with a high ceiling in the central hall. The spacious balcony is my pride, planted with my cherished herbs like lavender, chamomile, basil, mint, and rosemary. I grow a variety of herbs in abundance. Mojitos made with freshly picked mint are the best, and my homemade basil sauce is my son's favorite, and I always pack it in jars and sneak it into the boxes I send as care packages. My husband's study, his particular pride, features ample workspace and large shelves that display his collection of books and video games, fitting perfectly up to the ceiling. He spends most of his weekends there, coming out only for meals and bathroom breaks. I, on the other hand, enjoy my beloved gardening and watching dramas and movies that I taped during the week, making the most of our individual weekends. Reflecting on this easygoing second chapter of life post-child rearing, I enjoyed another tranquil weekend today. Both my husband and I work until evening on weekdays. I've been covering the mortgage for this somewhat ambitious home with my income. When our child turned 1, I put him in daycare and worked reduced hours. Once he was old enough, I returned to working full-time as a permanent employee. Now that child rearing is behind us, my current joys are work and gardening. But suddenly, a disruptive event occurred.
I sold this house to my brother.
I initially didn't understand what my husband was saying. "What do you mean?" I asked, puzzled. My husband explained with a slightly irritated expression.
You know my brother has been living in an apartment, right? He has 3 kids close in age, and it's pitiful for them to live in a small 2-room apartment. Since our son is independent now, I thought this would be a good time to pass this house on to my brother.
My husband decided on something so important without any discussion with me. As I stood there baffled, he glared at me with a deep frown.
Don't you know what helping people means? It's normal to lend a hand when a family member is in trouble. What a heartless person you are.
While I respect the sentiment of wanting to help a family in need, the fact that he made this decision without consulting his wife whom he lives with is something I simply cannot accept. Where are we supposed to live? Being informed after the fact is just too much. Anger welled up inside me, but I managed to keep it bottled up inside and spoke to my husband rationally, only to be silenced with his final word.
Cut it out. I'm the breadwinner of this family. Just be quiet and listen to me.
While my husband has always been domineering, this was the first time he had imposed his will to this extent. Moreover, his brother and his brother's wife have tended to rely on us for various things. 3 years ago, the brother and his wife, who frequently visited our house, said, "You only have 1 child, and he's already big. We wish you could look after our kids a bit." They would leave their 3 elementary school-aged children at our house and go out. It was just my son and me who looked after the 3 children. They often made excuses to leave their children with us while they went out to enjoy themselves.
Our house is big, so feel free to rely on us.
My husband would say while showing a good face to his brother, but he never actually took care of the children himself and stayed holed up in his study. At some point, he even installed a lock on the inside to keep out intruders. And the nephews we were looking after had no sense of restraint.
We're tired of Auntie's cooking. We want to eat out.
I want a hamburger.
Mama and Papa said that Uncle and Auntie are very kind and will grant any wish we have.
Considering their parents, it's no surprise the children turned out this way. No matter how many times I discussed it with my husband, he never listened to my opinions. Even my son, who was in high school at the time, was fed up by the weekend. We talked it over, and my son took up a part-time job while I also scheduled work to have an excuse to refuse taking care of the nephews. Even my usually idle husband didn't want to look after them alone and cleverly managed to refuse his brother. After that, we became distant from my brother-in-law and his family, but to suddenly be faced with giving up our house was dizzying. The next day, my brother-in-law and his family came to our house under the guise of a viewing. The nephews, now middle schoolers, were as disrespectful as ever. They entered what was supposed to be their new room and started partying loudly. My brother-in-law, Bob, seemed happy and said, "You're moving out? Well, this house is too big for just the two of you anyway. We'll take good care of it, don't worry." I had no idea about this move until yesterday, yet Bob showed no concern at all. Then his wife, Sarah, stood in the kitchen as if she owned the place and said,
"Make sure you hire a proper cleaning service before you leave. It's a hassle for us if you skimp on that."
How could someone be so pushy? I was utterly disgusted by Sarah's overt hostility that seemed to scream, "Get out soon." I hinted that the mortgage wasn't fully paid off yet, but Bob just smiled confidently and said,
"No worries. Our eldest is starting high school next year, and my wife is going to work part-time. She'll have to earn that much at least."
"Leave it to me. I'll work hard."
Watching this exchange between them, I wondered if they were misunderstanding something. I had been paying the mortgage since we built this house. The amount is $1,800 a month. Could Bob and his family really manage such payments? I'm a pharmacist, so I have a decent income, but even so, that's a hefty sum. In contrast, I heard from my husband that Bob's take-home pay is about $2,000. There is no way they can live on just $200 after mortgage payments. It seems they believe I work in a pharmacy, earning a modest salary, and that the mortgage payments are not substantial.
Pharmacy, right? That sounds kind of cool.
I'm currently taking an online course to get a medical office certification. Once I get it, I'll re-enter the workforce.
Bob and his wife are ever so cheerful. My husband has always been proud, and I felt that he harbors inferiority complex towards me, who earns significantly more than him. He didn't want others to know about the salary difference, so he'd tell people my job was something like working in a pharmacy office. Anyway, Bob and his wife probably think they can manage the mortgage if they both work. As I was thinking this, Bob suddenly asked,
By the way, how much is the mortgage per month?
My husband's face, which had been smiling, froze. It seems he didn't even know the monthly payment amount. $1,800. I blurted out without hesitation. Both my husband and Bob's family were momentarily stunned.
$1,800. Are you kidding?
Sarah barely managed to get those words out. It's no joke. We bought it with no down payment, so we're paying $1,800 a month, including land costs. Sarah went pale and raised her voice.
We can't pay that amount.
Yes, I think so too. I silently wished this whole situation would just disappear. Bob, shocked by the amount, was pressing my husband.
You weren't seriously expecting us to pay this amount every month, were you?
My husband quickly whispered to me.
Hey, we made some extra payments, right? Is there still that much debt?
I've only paid extra during the summer and winter bonuses. It's a 35-year mortgage, so after calculating, we still have 15 years of payments left. While watching Bob and his family in dismay, I prayed silently that they would quietly back down. However, my husband suddenly blurted out something unbelievable.
Fine. We'll keep paying the mortgage.
Now it was my turn to be shocked. Bob and his wife, thrilled by this unexpected development, praised my husband. So generous, such a big heart. Seeing my husband smugly strut, I couldn't help but loudly object. What are you thinking? Why do we have to go to such lengths? Then my husband shut me up with his usual line.
Helping families in need is the right thing to do. Why are you so heartless?
I was so appalled I was lost for words. I was done putting up with my husband's shallowness, trying to look good by himself. Bob and Sarah, energized by my husband's suggestion, resumed their tour of our house.
We want to move in by the beginning of next month, so please take care of the paperwork and moving arrangements by then.
My husband dumped everything on me. My anger meter was off the charts. That night, I called my son, Christopher, who lives on his own. After explaining the situation at home and how I couldn't stay silent anymore, he laughed intriguingly over the phone.
It's good you're finally ready to fight back. You've been enduring all this time. Go give it to them. And if it comes down to divorce, Mom, you've got the strength to live on your own.
Encouraged by my son's supportive words, I resolved to definitely get back at my husband and Bob and Sarah, who were intent on having their way. Right after it was decided that Bob's family would take over our house, I consulted with the bank holding the mortgage. I had already been researching things like transferring the mortgage on my own since this discussion started. What I found out was that transferring a mortgage is generally not possible. If it is, it's typically within spouses or between parents and children. This was a slightly more complicated case of relatives. And I was the mortgage holder. It's possible to hide the relationship to change the ownership. But if the bank discovers this, it could be seen as a serious breach of contract, possibly demanding full repayment of the loan. Neither Bob and Sarah nor my husband knew this, having naively promised to hand over our house. I decided not to do anything about the handover until the day it was due, immersing myself in work and household chores instead. Seeing this, my husband was furious, of course.
Hey, get moving on the movers and such. If you keep dawdling, next month will be here before you know it.
I'm busy with work. You should handle it. Besides, if we're handing over the place, we need to arrange our new home too, right? What are you going to do about that?
You should handle that.
That's why I'm telling you I'm busy. Ignoring my silent husband, I headed off to work. This repeated day after day until my husband finally contracted with movers and boxes started arriving at our house.
Look, I've arranged the move. The contract for the new apartment is almost finished, so stop sulking and start packing.
But no matter what he said, I wouldn't start preparing. Day after day, this exchange continued, and each time my husband would noisily blame me.
Enough already. Stop being so selfish. If you keep this up, I have my own thoughts. I'll divorce you. Is that what you want?
I ignored him and kept watching TV. The next day, my husband actually brought home a divorce form and thrust it at me.
Do you see I'm serious? I'll forgive you this time, so start packing.
What does he mean, forgive me this time? I was truly speechless with astonishment. I quietly took the divorce form, signed it, and stamped it right in front of him. Seeing this, my husband, as I had expected, suddenly started panicking.
What? You can't be serious. Can't you take a joke?
I had seen through my husband's bluff. I don't want to be with someone who jokes about divorce. With that, I pushed the signed divorce form at him and headed to the bedroom. My resolute attitude finally quieted him down.
I'm sorry. I don't want a divorce. I want to be with you forever.
Seeing him cry and apologize, I was a bit surprised. Okay, I get it. But we're not moving from this house, and I'm not changing the ownership. Let's keep living here together. My husband understood my feelings but said dejectedly, "That's impossible. We've promised it to my brother and his wife. There's nothing we can do now." "It's okay." I gently tapped my shrunken husband's shoulder. Then, on the day we promised to hand over our house, my brother-in-law and his wife arrived, packing their belongings into a small truck borrowed from a friend. Since it was a weekday, their kids were at school.
Finally, our own home.
No more mortgage payments. How wonderful.
My brother-in-law and his wife are as carefree as ever. As they happily entered the house, I stood firmly in front of them. "I'm sorry, but unless you agree to these conditions, I cannot hand over the house to you." I held the mortgage contract in my hand. As it states here, changing the mortgage into another person's name is generally not possible. If you really want to live here, you'll need to pay off the remaining mortgage in full. My assertive stance intimidated my brother-in-law, but not his wife.
It's ridiculous for you to butt in. Just get out of here already.
She lashed out fiercely. I showed her the mortgage contract again. It's only natural for me to butt in. I'm the legal owner of this house. I pointed decisively at the owner's name, and she looked away in shock. My husband has no rights here. As the legal owner, I refuse to hand over this house. Please leave immediately. If you cause any more trouble here, I will call the police, I added with a threat, to which they come back with, "What's with you? Just because you earn a bit more, don't get all high and mighty. Don't you think about sharing some of that with your own family? You really are heartless." It was utterly pointless. It's fine to be heartless. Instead of always relying on us, please try to handle things yourself for a change. Set an example for your children. With that, I went inside the house and locked the door securely. Afterwards, my brother-in-law and his wife made a fuss outside the house for a while, but, receiving skeptical looks from the neighbors, they finally left. Soon after, my husband received a call from my brother-in-law.
We've already left the apartment. Please let us stay just temporarily until we find a new place.
He begged. My husband quietly said no. I couldn't help but burst out laughing. It was clear that if we let my brother-in-law's family in, they would stay forever. Besides, my husband had been intimidated by me threatening a divorce and had to stand firm. Calls from my brother-in-law came daily after that. Sometimes his wife called crying, but my husband consistently refused.
Isn't it too much? They said they don't even have money to rent a new place, and I feel sorry for the kids.
My husband muttered, glancing at me, probably wanting to show them some mercy. Just then, I suggested, "Didn't you have an apartment you were planning to move into? Why not let them stay there?"
That's a pretty good idea.
Smigly, my husband slapped his knee and called his brother. Later, I heard that his brother and his family of 5 moved into that apartment. I'd like to say all's well that ends well, but more troubles awaited my husband.
My brother and his wife aren't paying the rent. They said they would transfer it to me, but I've been covering it for months.
Just as expected. That shameless couple was never going to pay the rent. It was clear they would take advantage of the apartment my husband rented. At that time, I had anticipated the outcome of my suggestion to sublet the apartment to my brother-in-law. What a naive, pretentious thing to do! I scoffed sarcastically. Families are in trouble, so we gotta help out, right? You're not heartless like me, are you? My husband couldn't reply. Strapped for cash, my brother-in-law's family of 5 is now squeezed into a tiny 1-bedroom apartment. It's tough on the 3 growing boys, but maybe it's a fitting punishment for their spoiled behavior. I can hardly wait for their stress to explode. But I have no sympathy and no desire to help those who called me heartless. My brother-in-law and his wife continue their hyena-like scavenging, and now my husband is saddled with a huge debt for them. I'm so glad we keep our finances separate. While they face their pathetic fate without any remorse, I'll be harvesting the basil that has grown beautifully for when our son comes back home next month.